please welcome to the stage Travis Walton, an executive director of Research and Discovery.
I think we were going to put a mic in the middle of the auditorium so people could ask questions. Do we know where that is?
Right there.
Oh, we do have a mic stand? Sorry, I can't see it. Where is it? Is it right over here?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. Oh, it's in the corner. Very good. So, yeah, we're going to put a mic down here just so people can hear your questions. Because I'm sure if you have some important questions, it's really important to hear them, for the audience to hear them. And we'd like to invite you to ask some questions. Before any brave person is willing to come forward, I'll say a few words about the film. I started this project with a co-producer in Philadelphia named Bob Terrio. Bob is a dear friend. He's an industrial filmmaker. We're very good friends, and I don't think without his help starting the project, I would have been brave enough to start it. Bob and I got started on it, and then I kind of carried it through after we got started. He works full-time, and I tried to do this kind of stuff full-time. And it was a very moving process to go through making this film. Overall, it took about 5 years, and I'm not really a Hollywood producer, I'm just a small documentary filmmaker. And rather than spending the time trying to finance the film, I took a good bit of my own retirement money and put it into the film because I thought it was an important project. I do hope that I'm able to sell it to a network, and if any of you think it's a good film and you're willing to post any comments on the main website for the film, it's called TravisWaltonMovie.com. There are little cards in the back you can pick up and take with you. You can take a bunch of them if you want to send some of the cards to your friends. It's sort of a marketing pitch, but it's also important because I'm sure that many of you who are in the audience were drawn to this story because you probably experienced this area in New York. We were just at the Pine Bush Conference where we were running into many people that came up to us all day long and told us their stories that took place in the Hudson Valley, or the Hudson Valley Flat. New York is famous for a lot of sightings. So we hope that by making this film, it encourages more people to own their experience, to understand the inside story of really what Travis went through and what the logging crew went through. It wasn't a pretty picture. It's still not a pretty picture. As you heard, Travis would probably wish this didn't happen to him. But he can't go back and change that, so he's brave enough to come forward and talk about it. I am a member of MUFON. I'm a state section director in Pennsylvania. I also think this is an important cause. I am also an experiencer, nothing like Travis. I've had some major sightings. And they were in my gray box for a long time until I really understood them enough and realized I wasn't alone, and what I did see, I did see. And once I began to take ownership of that, it really changed the direction of my life and gave me the courage to do things like making this film. So I will also say that without the help of a huge number of people, this film would not have been possible. Many people stepped forward, pushed up their sleeves, and worked for free to make sure it happened. And that took place over 5 years. And that doesn't happen normally. That's an incredible act of generosity on many people's parts, including Bob Terrio, who worked with me, Gary Hilton. Hold the mic a little closer, I'm sorry. Hopefully you were able to hear some of what I said. Gary Hilton and Bob Terrio and the Fact or Fiction fellow, Ben Hansen. Stanton Friedman was a huge help to this, as well as Kathy Marden. They did archival research with me, and Stanton was a very big coach for me throughout this project. And it was a real honor to work with Travis. He's just everything you see and more. And now's your chance to talk to him and Peter and I. So are there any questions from the floor? Please feel free to come forward. You're welcome, thank you. I'm going to check my mics and be right back.
No questions? Good.
Don't be scared.
Hey, good evening, Mr. Walton. I got a quick question, actually a two-part question. You had mentioned with the PTSD with the soldiers and things like that, the things that they see or smell kind of stays with them. If there was one thing that you could recall, it's been over 40 years, what is something when you close your eyes or you have a nightmare or you catch yourself daydreaming about, what are a sight or sound or smell that comes back to you?
Without hesitation, it would be the eyes. When I rolled off that table and they came around there towards me and the three of them were staring together, that was an excruciating experience, and it was actually, the focus of my nightmares for months afterwards.
Really? Now, when you see, there's so many movies out there, different, alien movies and all kinds of stuff. When you see those kind of movies, do they affect you in any way?
Oh yeah, and sometimes I, take a bit of exception to the approach that Hollywood takes. I actually gave a talk to a group in Hollywood of just actors and producers and directors, and I was saying, you guys are resorting too often to this simple storyline of aliens as invading monsters. To have them unclothed, so they look more like monsters, and very, bestial.
A stereotype.
Is, when you have an extremely advanced civilization with, obvious educational knowledge types of things, you would think that there would be, a virtually infinite range of story ideas, because the possibilities are just, I guess the limit would be the imagination, and they just come back to this simple thing of invading monsters, and it's, I would think the subject would be worthy of a little loftier approach.
Just one last quick question. When you filmed the movie with James Garner and all the actors, we watched the movie last night. What was their take? You were, I'm sure, a consultant on the movie to make sure they got things right. What were the actors' take on your story at that time when you filmed it?
The actors did say in interviews that they believed us, on the basis of talking to us, and I think that's kind of a really sort of a good recommendation, because actors, of course, would be the kind of person that could spot quote unquote acting,
Sure.
and this happened. So James Garner in particular expressed the idea that he was a little bit sorry that he was playing the part of such a harsh disbeliever,
right.
He actually did believe us. And I found out later that his one daughter, his only offspring, Gigi, was not aware that he had already told me this. So she sought me out at a film festival up in Sonoma in the Northwest, and to tell me that, and this was after James Garner passed away, that he always wanted to let me know that he did believe that what we said happened really happened. And that really parallels the situation with the sheriff himself, because for many years he was portrayed as being totally disbelieving. His main political buddies were, redneck type guys. So he always postured as a disbeliever. But I got a number of emails from his relatives and friends that, said that in confidence he would say, no, he thinks that, we saw what we saw. And same thing with Deputy Flake, who went by the name Blake in the movie.
Right. All right, well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rudy Nunez. I would call myself an experiencer, and this is something that just came up in my mind as well as some of my friends. We're just curious about if you had either for the purposes of your own, like after the fact research, had any sort of medical tests that would have shown some kind of effect from radiation like the trees had had, or if, after, once you had been found after the experience, if that was anything that, if there was anything interesting there.
We do have some preliminary indications. The blood test didn't really indicate radiation poisoning in me, but there was an anomaly in the electroencephalograph, the brainwave scan, and that we're doing follow-up research on that. The technician at the Barrows, it was a world-famous brain trauma center there in Phoenix. It's the one where Muhammad Ali went after he developed Parkinson's. And the technician was not aware of who I was. I was put in there under an assumed name. My doctor knew there would just be way too much, bias in the testing, to put me in under my own name. So it was a pretty good technique to eliminate investigator bias. He has no expectation of finding something, and something was found in terms of a pattern there. What was the rest of the question?
Well, I was thinking, at least nowadays there's modern tests. I was wondering if it would be possible to track something like sort of like tree rings, like a damaged DNA,
Okay.
stuff like that.
When I got out of the truck, I threw open the door and left it open. And Kenny was sitting right there, and he has since developed skin cancer on his right arm, which would have been in the open doorway. So I kind of wonder if maybe he didn't get a little dose of radiation without the subsequent repairs.
Thank you.
Hi, Travis. Thanks for making the trip up here. It's nice to have the real experiencer here in Ithaca.
Nice town.
Thanks. It occurs to me that a lot of times when aliens are portrayed, just drawings and whatnot, they look fairly similar in unrelated incidents. When you describe the three beings that stared at you, have their features been commonly described by other people? Maybe Peter can even answer this better.
Yeah, it's definitely the case.
Without question. We in the research community that I've been a member of for about 4 decades, have gotten myriads of descriptions. In the literature, they run from the phenomenal to the almost unimaginable. However, the great majority of them fall within a fairly set group of recognizable beings. The ubiquitous gray that has now become a part of popular culture, rather emaciated, 4 feet high, large head, large cranial structure, eyes, the humanoid types, and then variations on the theme, reptoids, insectoids like large praying mantises, but the two types that Travis encountered were certainly established in the literature well before his experience in 1975.
And, I'd like to point out that, sometimes people point to the variations in some of these beings that are grouped into what's called grays and say, well, look, there's discrepancies. They look a little bit this way here and a little bit that way there. But, the physicist Michio Kaku was interviewed here on television a year or so ago. He said, people keep imagining these civilizations as maybe being a few hundred years ahead of us, but they could be literally millions of years ahead of us. In other words, they've been spacefaring for so long, they could have branched out, colonized different planets, and actually been there long enough to sort of differentiate, even though they came originally from a base stock. But another point that the skeptics were really fond of making is claiming that the odds against any extraterrestrial being, even having 2 legs and 2 arms and being, quote unquote, humanoid in the sense of the general form of the human, it would just be highly unlikely. I disagree. We had a speaker at the Pine Bush that pointed out the prevalence of bilateral symmetry in life on Earth, not just in vertebrates, but even in insects and other kinds of similar life forms. It's a kind of this is the way the universe worked kind of thing he was saying. And biologists have long observed this thing called parallel evolution, that when you have creatures living in a similar environment, even though they may not be related genetically at all, they come to take on very similar forms, because that's what works in that environment. And the kind of a creature that's going to build a machine that's going to come here is not going to be an octopus or an insect. That's impractical, as far as tool using and that sort of thing. We recognize that most things that come to live in the water or the sea come to look very fish-like, even though they might not be related to fish at all. It might be a mammal, it might be an amphibian, a reptile, even birds. They come to look very fish-like because, 2 little flippers in the front and a big driving thing in the back, and all that is what works in that environment. So it's not going against the odds. It's actually highly likely that the life forms we're going to encounter on other life-supporting planets are going to most likely astonish us at how similar they are to here rather than how exotic.
I guess opposable thumbs are good everywhere.
And just to follow up, Dave, the discrepancies, for example, that Travis mentioned at the start in the description of the so-called grays, some of us feel that these are cloned creatures and they're kind of the worker drones of the, species, so to say. Whether or not that's true, I can't say. But everybody in this audience is classified as a Homo sapien and son of a gun. I'm looking out at you and you're all a little different. Which may account for some of that.
There's also that thing, if you ask people to describe, a perpetrator of a crime, you get a lot of variation. They all saw the same dude, so, and the people that are seeing these beings are not exactly stress-free at the moment that this is happening.
That's a very important point. By the way, you look a little different than some of the people in this audience, too. I just want to add that, being that close.
Yeah.
2 wild card factors. One is we know, as well as we can know, that these intelligences, whether either in their biological state or technologically, have power to cloud our minds, so to say, to either shift their shape or more logically put a picture in our head that maybe is more acceptable to us. Having worked crisis intervention for years, I had to become very familiar with the profile and physiology of human shock. And epinephrine dump, adrenaline dump, tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, and possibly even, I'll tell you one thing, if after all these years in scholarship and work in this field and interviewing hundreds of people that have had variations on these experiences, if I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a strange glow in the room and I had trouble moving and I looked at the foot of the bed and there are several of these beings, I think I would freak out and possibly superimpose something on them that's a little more acceptable. One of our friends, somebody who's been through these experiences, who published a marvelous book last year on the prevalence of owl imagery for people that have had these experiences. A classic thing being, I remember seeing a 4-foot white owl standing on my windowsill. There are no 4-foot white owls. Yeah. Probably if there were, they wouldn't be standing on the windowsill. Whether or not that's a screen memory or a projected image or human shock saying, I'd rather see an owl than you, we can only speculate on.
Yeah, it was interesting to me that the second beings that you saw looked more human. Is that how I
Yeah, of course the skeptics say, this can't possibly be, the odds would be so far against us. Well, there might be more to it than just, this is the kind of being that would be spacefaring. It goes the other way too. They, by being something similar, might be the kind of species that would be more interested in us, just because of that kind of similarity. And of course, there's also theories that, we were planted here, seeded here by them, that sort of thing. But there's so many examples of parallel evolution. I give the example of a flying squirrel in America and a sugar glider in Australia, which is actually a marsupial, which diverged from the mammalian line millions of years ago. But because they are nocturnal tree climbing things, they come to live very similarly, and they come to look alike. Out in Arizona, we have what's called a javelina, or a peccary, and hunters will loosely refer to them as wild pigs, but they're not related to pigs at all, even though they have a flat snout and tusks and a little curly tail and very similar habits, but they're not pigs. Anyway, your question.
When you're ready. So, as someone that has been very interested in the cosmos and in space, and also in lots of other theories, I'm curious about your experience in that I wonder how maybe it was obviously like this very traumatic and like kind of taken away experience. Do you ever think that it could be something that is because of government or scientific testing and not something from the other
Certainly. And that was,
cosmos?
of course, one of my early suspicions, fears that could be something of that nature. Even seeing the human-looking beings, I at first assumed they were from some Earth-based agency. It was only after, these kinds of things just weren't fitting in that I came to other conclusions. But there may even to this day be a certain number of UFO sightings that are actually the government tinkering around with testing people's reaction or whatever, just maybe even just using perception of the UFO phenomenon as a cover for testing various secret craft, weapons of various kinds.
Okay. Just, throwing it out there.
These big black triangles are very often, thought to be something governmental, or at least something that was once alien that's been back engineered. But
I guess, I don't know, I'm a big hypocrite, of everything, of life, of everything, so I want to question it all. And I'm just curious, if you actually, you are someone that actually had this experience with light and being taken away and having a time lapse and having an experience where you don't remember a very long period of your time.
Well, any logical, fair-minded person wants to exhaust the possibilities of whatever range of explanations there might be, There's nothing more closed-minded than just seizing in on one thing and saying, oh, this is it, this is what it's got to be.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
I saw the movie Fire in the Sky, and is that the one where it terrified me? It had the needle coming into your eye and everything. But watching this, it sounded like it wasn't a scary kind of thing.
Definitely, Fire in the Sky did fictionalize things, especially the part aboard the craft. Anytime Hollywood makes a fictional or dramatic story about real-life events, they want to speak in sort of the shorthand of film, it's in broad generalities kind of a thing, and abbreviations, because you're telling a story that actually spanned years in 90 minutes. That's compact if you go to thinking about it. So some of the changes they made in Fire in the Sky, they reduced the number of crewmen. Two of my brothers, Don and Dwayne, became one named Dan. Several of the lawmen and debunkers were all rolled into this one character that was played by James Garner. So there was a simplification and an abbreviation.
Floating, weightless,
No.
terrifying
Didn't happen.
things.
But, actually, I don't think that so much of what they were doing was jazzing it up. It was just a different story. I mean, there's a lot of people that have sent me emails saying they wish they had stuck to the real story. To them, it's far more interesting. And I've been collecting those. And one day I'll bring all of them into the studio and say, it's time to do this.
So you felt that they were actually trying to help you? That was your impression?
Yeah, and it took me a long time to, figure that out. At first I was so traumatized that I looked at it pretty negatively, but I'm pretty, firm on the idea that it was more of a rescue than an abduction.
I'll make one quick comment that one of my motivations behind making the film is when you read Travis's book, you realize how distorted the Hollywood film really was. And I don't think when Travis started to discuss the project with Tracy Torme, that was fully understood. And I think it was a disappointment. Many of us speak about it. I know it was a disappointment to Travis that choice was chosen. But that's what Hollywood does, and that's the difference between a documentary film and a documentary filmmaker and Hollywood. We tried to really get it accurate to his word, to his book, and I used his book, which is available for sale, to base how I made the documentary. I outlined and organized the documentary based on the facts in his book. And we have another question.
Hi, so I was just wondering, in the film it stated that Snowflake was a town that was small and very religious. So I was wondering if you yourself were religious, and if so, if this experience impacted your religious views at all.
Well, I think that this event itself actually, not just for me, but for the crew, in a broader sense, broadened their perspectives on things. It really made us start questioning, the big picture, our place in the universe and that sort of thing. But I don't think it drew any of us in any particular one religious direction so much as what I call a spiritual direction, which I think is broader than secular denominations. It's just an attitude that you understand what we must have in common with these sorts of civilizations. What does a thinking people's what is the way they're going to react? People very often ask me, do you think they're benevolent, malevolent? What do you think are their intentions? I really don't hold much with the evil alien concept. I think that with such vast improvements in technology, you're going to have necessarily a similar progress in moral and ethical development. And the reason that's necessary is because look at the situation with nuclear weapons. You gain the ability to destroy entire planets or star systems. They better get past this warlike attitude that many humans have. So I think the very fact that they are still alive is kind of implies that they would have to have a better ethical base than humans do.
Yeah, thank you.
Travis, thank you very much for coming here. Certainly, what a movie and what a story. My own sort of life was characterized by an interest in the UFO phenomenon from a very young age. I remember, I think Howard Menger was my introduction to this sort of process, and it was a crazy man who had traveled to Venus and had been welcomed by the space beings, and and I look at that and I think, God, what a fanciful bunch of stuff. Was your own childhood characterized by any interest in this kind of stuff before your experience, or has most of your learning been done after the fact?
Well, I think the UFO skeptics love to dig into people's past and say, aha, you once said UFO back in 1943, that means something. I'd say that in this society, the awareness of space travel as a part of this popular culture is just about universal. I mean, everybody knows what Star Trek is. Everybody, cartoons, the Jetsons, whatever, the idea is not so unusual that to have ever encountered it would signify anything in particular. I do think, though, that it is sort of indicative of a kind of a higher reaching out that humanity has to consider our place in a much wider universe. It's limiting to think, in terms of just nation states and, their eyes on the ground and just these political squabbles and whatnot. I think it's ennobling for people of Earth to, think of themselves as citizens of the cosmos rather than just some nation that needs to get it up on the next one.
Yeah, not to disparage any childhood interest in the UFO
I don't think I
phenomenon at
had
all.
particularly childhood interest, but like I said, as soon as something happens, people go, aha. I remember we once played Cops and Robbers that day, or something like that. There was an incident 8 or 10 years before where my brother had a daylight sighting. But when you really get to pursuing it, I don't think that having a UFO sighting is all that unusual. The UFO skeptics try to act like, aha, what are the odds? You'd never have a UFO sighting in the same family. But actually, what they consider unlikely is actually highly likely. You look at the statistics, how many people have had a UFO sighting, the percentage is so high that in any one group, you're more likely to have seen something than not. So.
I think the interesting thing in your story is
with a show of hands, how many people have seen something that not necessarily is an extraterrestrial spacecraft, but was unidentified, something that was flying not like an airplane or something like that. It's pretty prevalent. It's not that. See, back in the day, when this happened, that was the heyday for the skeptics. Science was so ignorant at the time that they had a couple of positions. One of them was life would be so rare in the universe that it would be so far away that they'd never find us. We'd be like a grain of sand on the beach, looking for that one grain, and even if they could never find us, kind of a thing. But here, 40 years later, NASA has already identified literally hundreds of Earth-like planets from here. Now, if with our relatively primitive technology, we could see them from here, certainly they saw us from there far, far earlier than that. So, the idea that the UFO skeptics promoted back in the day pretty successfully was that anybody that thought that there could be alien life is kind of a kook. We've reached a tipping point now in the opposite direction. People who actually think that we could be alone in this universe, that's the kook. I mean, really, the values that you plugged into the Drake equation back then to calculate the number of civilizations in the galaxy were so much smaller than we found that they actually are.
When you think of the fact that we probably are unaware of about 95% of the mass of the universe, cannot really characterize it fully, why would we be arrogant enough to believe that we have much of a complete understanding of anything? Once again, your courage and your honesty, and having learned from this whole circumstance, some of it, I'm sure, extraordinarily painful learning, is really a model for us all in terms of just standing your ground and, learning. So thanks for coming.
Thank you. You saw Stan Friedman in the film, he's written a book called Science Was Wrong. And, just the history of science going way back is full of some of the most learned, respected men of science of the day had some solemn pronouncements about things that are quote-unquote impossible that have turned out to be quite the opposite. So probably one of the safest ways to look foolish in science history is to declare something impossible.
Yeah, well, as you come up, Ben Hansen, who was part of a program called Fact or Fiction, Fact or Fake. I think that was on the Sci-Fi Network. He actually came to look into Travis's case because he was asked to determine if it was fact or fake. And after about 5 days spending time with Travis after looking at all the data, he, of course, became convinced that it was truly factual and that it really did happen. And I've often found that once you start digging into a story, and I've now dug into this one over 7 years, between reading, going into archives, we keep turning up more stuff, more evidence that wasn't known at the time, that kind of reveals a deeper layer of the truth. And we tried to reveal some of that in the film, but we certainly didn't reveal all of it. So the more you dig, the more you find. And that's where it really gets interesting. So I encourage you to become researchers as well and continue to dig. Another question from the audience. And please introduce yourself.
My name is Cindy. I'm from Ithaca. I'd like to say thank you very much for coming here. Great job on the film. Very well done. My question is for Travis, and I'm kind of going back where I've read a lot of things about people's experiences, abductions, or visitations, sightings, and it seems that maybe there might be a majority of people, especially with sightings, that continue to be revisited or sightings continue. Has that ever happened to you? Have you experienced a sighting since then, or visitation of sorts that you can talk about?
I try to stick to the things that I can corroborate, where I can point you to the source, some medical report, official government document, photos, maps, the kind of stuff that you can be as certain as I am. And so anything that, I'm just aware that it happened and that's the extent of it, that doesn't add to credibility, it takes away from it. And that's my goal here, is to make people understand this is real. And people need to look at the evidence that's supporting it. Anything that seems, a little bit too far out or anything like that, let's let that go for another time. It's there are some pretty fantastic things, yes. I did have a sighting with a large group of people of one of these giant black triangles. And this was like maybe, 5 or 6 years ago. And so, but I can't even be certain that would be extraterrestrial, because some people believe those are, at least in part, back-engineered craft that the military has put together. But they're huge, I'll tell you that. This thing looked like it was a quarter of a mile across.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Tyler. So back when you were explaining the two different, I guess, not different, but you saw the grays, and then you saw the guy with the dome over his head. That would have to mean that the spaceship or whatever was pressured, or did that, when you saw that, did you think anything about it, or were you just like, sort of in the moment of like, holy crap?
I was mainly concerned with getting answers to my questions, so my hysteria, of asking all these questions, I thought either you can't hear me with that on, or you can't be heard clearly with it on. So, I was going to go with him, And of course it implies that the air that's in there is insufficient in some way, and I did have that feeling of suffocation. And so I feel that was probably at least part of the reason for the helmet, because the other humans weren't wearing the helmet, the ones that didn't go in there.
Does it also imply that maybe it's a different species? Let's say it is Homo sapien and he was working as a scientist.
Yeah, that could be, you know, and with the example of the grays, you know, you have these huge eyes. And most anything on Earth that has really oversized eyes like that lives either nocturnally or in a cave or in the deep sea. Anyway, extreme low light conditions. And if you had a planet with a very heavy gravity, there might be, you know, heavy cloud cover and a limited amount of light reaching the surface. So you would have these really large eyes develop. And then the variation where they seem to be, you know, be just a black obsidian thing, could be some sort of a sunglass-like appliance to protect the eyes. They're so capable of gathering the tiniest amount of light in a dim situation. Might be extremely vulnerable to what we would consider normal brightness.
Yeah. And another one, after your encounter, did you experience anything that maybe you're like, is that a little weird, or maybe it's not weird, maybe it's a coincidence, but whether it's a physical or a mental sort of like aftermath from it, whether it's like a different sleep pattern or having a stronger appetite or any sort of phenomenon or anything?
Yeah, there was some interesting things along that line. And, you know, I really hesitated to report them because, like I said, I don't want to report anything I couldn't document. So finally, when I was able to go into my employers and get my attendance record at work, I could document the fact that I never called in sick in 40 years. That might be significant. You know, it could be just, you know, so there's healthy people here and there that just happen to have a good immune system or live extra healthy. But at least I'm not pointing to any chronic malady of some kind and saying, look what this did to me.
Like one last one. Do you ever oh God. If I think about it, I'll let you know.
Yeah, I wanted to comment that you made an important observation that few people, even though they watch this film, the fact that Travis encountered two different species probably working together or cooperating with one another really brings a very interesting thought, you know, or should bring an interesting thought to your minds. What does that mean? It was a very intriguing aspect to me, always, to Travis's story, which is one of the reasons why I felt it was extremely important to try to do a reenactment and have Travis really explain point by point by point by point what exactly happened. And even still with this documentary, that gets missed on a lot of people, so thank you for pointing that out.
Hi, I'm Cynthia. We came down from Syracuse, and I want to thank Travis for being so brave and coming here, and Jennifer, thank you for doing this great film. A few thoughts came to mind. First, actually, I just got this thought here because I am very in tune with animals and doing animal communication, been a wildlife rehabilitator. Did you have animals when you came back that they reacted to you differently? Because I just saw Dr. Stephen Greer's film Unacknowledged, and just the implications of animals in this, that we're all connected.
Well, I found the cats and dogs take a liking to me, but I don't know, I'm just nice to them, so.
Okay.
They don't have language, so maybe they have to be more in tune with other signals.
Right. So the two other questions I had is the sense of how they communicated the beings, and were you able to communicate?
Yeah, I think
Non-verbally
there was
or how
indications of telepathy.
communication.
I don't know that the human-looking ones were actually, speaking to each other telepathically, but in that case, they may have just been not wanting them to try to break through my hysteria, or maybe there was some clue about their existence based on an accent or something like that. For whatever reason, they didn't speak in front of me. Now, the smaller grays, I think they were telepathic, just the way they acted in unison, the way that stare felt so uncomfortable. I had a medical doctor at one of my talks point out that, the eye holes being the largest opening in the front of the skull, if they were able to project, some sort of energy from the brain in order to influence our simpler minds, it might involve the stare, that would be a way of directing this energy, or maybe even focusing it, something that the eyeball itself is adapted to do. But definitely that excruciating feeling that it came with that stare seems to indicate that perhaps they were pumping up the amps, you know what I mean? Like combining forces, there was the three of them doing the same thing at one time, and it wasn't working. And that may have been because my normal neural wiring was temporarily disturbed, having been hit by that blast of energy, and it wasn't working, which kind of brought them down to my level as far as hand-to-hand combat. Even in that weakened state, I was so much more powerful than them. But at that point, they better skedaddle if they can't control the raging beast.
Third question was, was there ever an attempt to silence you? To silence you?
Oh, to silence, definitely. There was a number of attempts, and I think that was what the debunkers were doing, with humiliation and the idea that they were just digging up dirt, any dirt they could. It's things that had nothing to do with the crewman's, story or what happened. They were just trying to discredit people. That was definitely a part of it. And the numero uno thing that happened there was that $10,000 bribe offer. And that's indisputable that happened. That offer was carried by the deputy sheriff, who stood by his story up until he passed away last year. The UFO skeptic that did it didn't dispute it in writings. He danced all around it. He didn't even try to say that offer was never made, because he did. And you have to ask, where was this $10,000?
That was my next question.
Probably not out of his account.
Right.
Just to add to that point, 40 years ago, in this skeptical community, one of the best ways, trying to project myself into that mindset, to, in their minds, discredit Travis through their arrogance and their limited thinking that something like this could possibly happen, would be to assume that if they left him alone to tell his story, he would simply discredit himself every time he spoke, because their mantra is, it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. They were wrong, like science.
Thank you so much.
There's a wonderful clip now that has been loaded to YouTube. I don't know how long it will be out there, but you can Google it and watch it. in 1993 when the Paramount film came out. Travis Walton and Mike Rogers were invited on to the Larry King Show and to talk about the opening of the film. And they also invited on Philip Glass, whom we talk about, because Philip was really ramping up his debunking. This had been 20 years from the point when the event actually happened. And he actually calls Mike Rogers a goddamn liar. And it came right out on national television. They didn't have a chance to like bleep it out. And someone videotaped that or recorded it off of television. And now it is up on YouTube and out in the public domain. So he would resort to name calling and things like that and get very upset when too much of the facts were revealed. And of course, Larry King was just really great at handling him.
But, you know, the facts were, you know, manipulated whichever way suited him best at the time. On that very show, he was saying, well, if there was a blast of energy like that, the pine needles, with this thick carpet of pine needles, he said, would have burst into flame and caught fire. But then in the same discussion, he says, well, Travis was thrown 20 feet and hit the rocky ground. There should have been bruises. Or was it a thick carpet of pine needles, or was it rocky ground that should have bruised me? You know, it's just whatever fits at the moment.
Hi, I actually have had a couple of sightings that were very bizarre, and there was really no explanation for them at all. And something that I've really never discussed, hardly at all, is when I was a child, I actually had 3 visitors that came to me every time that I would go to take a nap. During this one span of time where we were, I don't remember where we lived because we moved all over when I was a kid, but there were UFO sightings in the area throughout the time that this was happening to me. And I actually remember them. They looked human, but they would come in and they would have masks on and bright light shining down at me, and they would always, and I couldn't move. And they would say to me, "It's okay." And they would say my name, "Christy, it's okay." It was really like, and it scared the heck out of me. You know, even though they seemed to be trying to like calm me, and I don't remember anything other than that. But I guess I was really intrigued by these humans that you saw on the ship. Because in the movie, they look like they are like spacey, you know, like they're not like showing emotion. Do they show emotion behind their eyes? Do they look human, or do they look
They weren't using emotion with facial expression, but you know, if they're telepathic primarily, I would think that something far deeper that would be communicated with a facial expression would be easily communicated. And I would imagine that, you know, in an intelligent, sentient creature, that the telepathic improvement, so to speak, would be a quantum leap in terms of the advantages that would be gained from that immediately. So it would very quickly multiply in the gene pool, so to speak.
And I also had a question about the stare that you said about, you know, the grays. Their eyes, were they like black, or did they have like white spots?
No, they did not have the black covering. They had eyelids that blinked.
Okay.
And, you know, we were talking about how, you know, 10 people can witness a car wreck and they all have slightly different details. Is it witnessed variation, or is it actual variations among what they're calling grays, but they're actually separate groups?
Yeah, okay. And these puncture holes that you had on your elbow, one puncture hole, okay, what was that like? Was it like?
Well, the doctor described it, you know, he knows his anatomy, and he said, he made the point, which is very significant, not over any major blood vessel. But of course, the debunkers who wanted to say it was all a drug hallucination were trying to say that this was a drug injection. But for one thing, hallucinogens are not injected. That is a popular method of any known street drugs. It also just wasn't over any major blood vessel. It also could have been something that happened at work, you know, unrelated to the experience with these beings.
Okay, and you didn't have any other like medical like, I don't know, things that would say like, you know, maybe we've been like probed or something? Like, did you have anything that would show, you know, something like that? Or did it seem like, you know, you were returned fairly normal?
Fairly normal.
Yeah.
They definitely put things back the way they're supposed to be because, you know, I had extraordinary health, and it wasn't just EEG, it was also EKG, you know, blood and urine testing, upper body x-rays. It was a pretty thorough medical exam. I was a primary concern with that in those immediate days following.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming up and like sharing this, you know, with everybody. Thank you for your
Thanks for your interest.
I think we're, unless you have a question, Doug.
Sorry, I'm trying to sense the mic.
This is our host, this is Doug Levine, who got behind this project and decided to screen it.
Thank you, Peter, Travis, and Jennifer for bringing this film here. I really appreciate it. I personally have never seen a UFO myself, but I can tell you that the two ghosts that hang out here, I'm sure love the film. We can talk about ghosts. That could be another movie here at the State Theater. That's something that we actually know something about here. But yeah, I wanted to thank you for coming, and I'm actually going to wrap up the Q&A part right now. But I believe you have some books and other items to sell in the back, and do a little meet and greet in the back as well.
Perfect. I was just about to think the same thought, so like minds think alike. I wanted to also say we might do something again here with Doug's cooperation with Peter Robbins, who is an author. We may actually hold a little UFO conference here. So if you'd like to know about it, you should write your name and email down, because usually UFO conferences don't have a big budget. You can't hear me? Is that what you're saying? You can't hear me? Yeah, if you want to know about any future events that we may do here that are UFO related, there's a pad of paper in the back, and write your name and number down. If you're interested in a version of this film, which we make available for sale, it's in the back. We have a couple of posters in the back and postcards, and thank you so much. And we'll autograph them. Travis is going back to autograph them. So thank you all for coming. Thanks so much.